Right. What's up, everyone? I am back home here in the Hoosier State after being gone in Los Angeles for 11 days. For work, it was fantastic. The weather was great. A lot of really pretty sunsets and whatnot. That's about my fifth time out in Los Angeles. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of getting over going out to LA quite a bit. Not that it's not pretty, not that it's not a beautiful city, but there's only so much you can see. There's a lot of traffic, and it's nothing compared to the Midwest. After having been out, of the Midwest for so long and being able to finally come back, it's always nice to be able to come home, even if it is just to the flyover state of Indiana. But there's a lot that happened while I was gone. I still kept up on everything. I didn't get to do my last episode here on StreamYard and here on video. Unfortunately, I did everything through Spotify. So if you missed that episode, go catch it. This one's going to definitely be a lot better. I've got all of my equipment, everything like that I can actually work with and be able to pull up here on screen. So this episode is going to be tremendously better. Please follow me wherever you like to get your podcasts at if you enjoy this. If you'd like seeing me, I am on the All Sports All Plays Network. You'll catch me on a variety of shows there. Of course, you can also follow me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all at Inside the Hoosier Mind, on TikTok as well. And on X, formerly known as Twitter, you can find me at Hoosier Mind. So let's dive into all the crazy things that's happened over the college football weekend, as well as the NFL, and of course the breaking news out of Chicago. We'll start first with college, as I kind of always do, because I feel like college kind of deserves the limelight first, because they're technically in week 4. They're ahead of the NFL currently, so I like to give them some love first. So we'll jump into probably the biggest story of them all. We'll jump into Colorado State versus Colorado. Colorado able to come away with the victory, a 43-35 win in double overtime. Shedeur Sanders looked absolutely fantastic. Was 38 of 47, 348 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a pick. While the Colorado State quarterback, Fowler Nichols, 34 of 47, 367 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks. Of course, this is also the game where Travis Hunter unfortunately got hurt, has a lacerated liver, and is expected to be out for quite a while, at least for the next 3 weeks, which hurts Colorado, especially considering they have 3 really big matchups coming up this coming week, where they have to go to Oregon to face number 10 Oregon. Then they're going to host number 5 USC, and then they go to Arizona State. So Arizona State maybe a little bit of a better chance. But the next 2 matchups with top 10 teams, not only on the road, but then coming home, it's going to be hard for Colorado to have to face. So let's kind of dive into the whole Travis Hunter thing. I wasn't super upset at the hit. Not that it wasn't a bad hit. It wasn't really necessary on their end. What a lot of people need to realize is this is a very emotional game. And at the end of the day, it is just a game. But these are, let's be realistic. Everybody refers to them as kids, and technically they are. They're, 18 to 22-year-old, men that are out on the field. They're still kind of learning life. They're still learning the game. They're still learning a lot on top of having to play a very high contact sport that they're going to potentially make millions of dollars on. And for them, this is really a business. And for them, they are the business itself. So the fact that that Blackburn did that to Travis Hunter, I don't think he's a dirty player. I do think it's a bit of emotion, and it's one of those, Travis Hunter, he's a big guy, and you're going to have to get physical with him, because if you're not physical with him, he's going to dominate you, and he's going to unfortunately dominate you on both sides of the ball, both offensively and defensively. So I'm not necessarily endorsing or, I'm not condoning the hit. I don't think it was legal. I don't think it should have been done, but it happened. And like Coach Prime said, the game is over. At the end of the day, it is just a game. They've already moved on from it. They have forgiven him. Travis Hunter has forgiven him. It is what it is. That's a part of the sport. And I think that's what a lot of people forget is whenever we see these injuries to Travis Hunter, whenever we see these things to like DeMar Hamlin, unfortunately, even the injury to Nick Chubb, that's part of a high contact sport like football. A lot of people have equaled it to you're getting hit by a Mack truck, because you've got guys running 20 plus miles an hour that weigh, at minimum, 185 to 200 pounds at minimum coming at you at that type of speed. That's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt really badly. So it does suck that Travis Hunter is going to be out. He's an electric player. It will be interesting to see, though, how Colorado is going to be able to, deal without him. They struggled a lot throughout that game. Now, what I will say is this was kind of a good idea to see how Colorado matches up against bigger teams, because Colorado State looked like they completely outsized them. That offensive line for Colorado looked, super sloppy. Shador, and this has kind of been the thing the whole entire college football season that we've seen out of them is Shador's having to kind of run for his life. He's very mobile. He moves out of the pocket, and he's able to extend plays. He makes plays, and it's super exciting to watch. But defense is also going to be one of their Achilles heels. It reminds me a lot of USC. Offensively, they have a lot of talent. They can move the ball with no problem. But defensively, can they get a stop? Now, we saw Shiloh Sanders, of course, get the pick 6 on the Colorado State quarterback, return it back. We've seen Travis Hunter make plays. So they have playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. They need to be able to have a pass rush, and they need to be able to stop the run. That's really their two big things. And, of course, the Colorado State game was a shootout. I think that was part of Jay Norville trying to get his team fired up. His team is obviously going to come to his defense. Now the fact that Colorado has come into this big limelight because of the primetime effect. Deion Sanders primetime brings the spotlight. He brings the notoriety. He brings all of that to Colorado, and they have been interesting to watch. And I know a lot of people have really hated on Colorado because they have a lot of the spotlight. They have probably taken the biggest spotlight in college football away from really all the major programs. We haven't really heard or talked a lot about Ohio State because there hasn't really been anything super spectacular. I'm going to dive in a little bit here about Alabama here shortly. Alabama has been nothing compared to what they have been in the last, 10 plus years. They've been almost not irrelevant, but they have not looked like the Alabama of old. LSU lost to Florida State. Florida State even kind of got quiet because of the very close game this past week against Boston College. So for Colorado to basically be in the college football spotlight right now is super rare considering they went 1-11 the previous years. Now, I know a lot of people, whether they like Prime or whether they just want to see Colorado lose, or if they're just a fan of another college football team. I know I've seen a lot of Alabama fans already sick and tired of hearing the Colorado football hype. And, there's a lot of questions is, can Colorado move on into the college football playoffs, and are they playoff contenders? I don't think so. I don't think so yet. I kind of look back to what Deion Sanders said about when he was at Jackson State, because a lot of people said, okay, well, how are you going to do if you go up against a Power 5 team? Are you ready to face the Alabamas? And I think Prime would probably say the same thing that he said when he was at Jackson State. Look, you have to give me a couple years to build a culture, get the guys that I want, be able to turn this around. And you think he did a lot in the transfer portal. And, football is not an exact science. It's a lot of trial and error. Okay, is this guy going to work? Is this guy not going to work? So coming into next year, he's definitely going to see, okay, these guys worked, this guy didn't work. We're going to get rid of this guy. We're going to bring new guys in. And not only that, now players are going to look and say, hey, look at what Colorado was able to do. They were electric. They were fun to watch. They're going to be coming into a new conference that's going to be super competitive. It's also, we're going to see if Deion's able to get guys into the NFL. Then guys are going to look at, okay, Colorado can potentially be another entryway for me to go take my game to the next level, potentially earn more money, even win Super Bowls. So it'll be interesting to see how well Deion can do with that. And again, I don't see Colorado making a ton of noise this year schedule-wise. I just don't think it's really going to happen. Like I said, they still have to deal with Oregon. They still have to deal with USC. Then they have to deal with Arizona State, Stanford. Then after that is when their schedule gets even more rough. Currently, at the moment, UCLA is ranked number 22. They have to go to LA to face UCLA. Then they're going to host number 14 Oregon State as it stands currently. Then they host Arizona. Then they finish their last two games against number 21 Washington State and number 11 Utah. So it's going to be a rough schedule for them. I honestly could see them finishing about probably 8-4, and I say 8-4 with losses to Oregon, USC, Oregon State, and probably Utah, maybe even Washington State, so 7-5. But that is a huge, complete 180 turnaround compared to what they've had in the past, especially going 1-11. They've had like one winning season in the last 15 years. So anything for Colorado at this point is immediately up. that was immediately up the day that he beat Nebraska, and the fact that they have 2 wins, which is literally double what they had last year. So it'll be fun to watch. I'm excited to watch Colorado football. I'm excited to watch them come back into the Big 12, kind of renew a lot of those rivalries, as well as bring a lot of the Pac-12 rivalries with them. But again, I don't expect Deion to go into the playoffs making noise right now. I would say give him a couple of years. I know a lot of people are speculating, will he potentially go to the NFL? If he does, will he take his kid, try to take Shedeur with him? If he goes in the NFL, I could see that happening. But he's even stated on several occasions he doesn't necessarily want to go to the NFL because, and he made a great point, it's hard to motivate grown men who are making hundreds of millions of dollars to play for you and to play. Whereas with kids, he can basically act as a father figure. Look, I've done this for a long time. I was successful at the NFL level. I've been successful on a personal life level, on a business level. This is what I'm going to not only teach you how to do on the football field, this is what I'm going to teach you to do in life. It's a little bit harder to do that in the NFL. Now, he potentially could if he goes to a really young roster and takes a lot of those kids from college, he could potentially do that. Now, saying that, we've thought a lot of potentially college coaches could have that same success coming into the NFL. If they come into teams, you look at Urban Meyer with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, that did not pan out well at all. Matt Rule with the Carolina Panthers didn't work out very well. So it's very rare that you can have some of these coaches transition from college to the NFL and it be completely seamless and work out pretty well. So I don't know if Deion would have that same success. I kind of enjoy having him in college football because college football now, especially if you look at, you don't really see a lot of coaches staying around as much anymore, especially with some of these programs. Jim Harbaugh stayed at Michigan for the last 10 years. Nick Saban's been at Alabama for a long time. Brian Kelly, he left Notre Dame to go to LSU after being able to only do so much. So it doesn't happen very often that you get big name college coaches not only stay at a program, but be able to kind of consistently build and go with it. And again, it doesn't always transfer over to the NFL, unfortunately, because heck, the NFL learns and studies. They get used to, okay, hey, we saw what you did in college. This is what you're probably going to do. And you don't have access to the same type of guys. With college, it's a recruitment battle. Hey, how close can we get? Do we know we are going to be able to beat our own conference? We don't have to worry about facing different opponents every 3 to 4 years. We're going to face the same guys for the most part every single year. So we'll see how he goes. I'm still excited to watch Colorado football, though. One thing I'm not excited to watch, and luckily I haven't had to watch a lot of it, is Alabama football, because it has been absolutely ugly, downright ugly for Alabama football this year. Not only did they beat Middle Tennessee, which is anybody really surprised that they were able to beat them? No. They beat Middle Tennessee. They did lose to Texas in a close game, 34-24. But then they turn around and they only beat South Florida by 14. It was 17-3. Ty Simpson was actually ended up coming into the game. So Tyler Buckner, who actually started for the Crimson Tide this past week with his coordinator Reese, that also came from Notre Dame. He started the game. He was 5 of 14, 34 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. And he had 2 rushes for 11 yards, no touchdowns, as long as carry was 8. That's their, that was the guy that's replacing Jalen Milroe from the Middle Tennessee State game as well as the Texas game. Then they said, okay, we're going to try Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson comes in, does a little bit better. 5 of 9, 73 yards, averaged 8.1 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. The absolute highlight for Alabama was Roydell Williams, 17 carries, 129 yards, a touchdown, as well as Chase McClellan, 13 carries, 74 yards, no touchdowns. This is absolutely mind-blowing to me that this is Alabama football. They went to South Florida to face USF, who is technically a Group 5 school, and they only beat them by 14 points. This is not a USF school that anybody expected high hopes from. This is not a USF school of old where They were constantly ranked. Maybe they're having a down year. Maybe they're just not able to do it as well. Their quarterback, Byron Brown, 14 to 28, 87 yards, one pick. He averaged 3.1 yards a throw. He was also their lead carrier. 23 carries, 92 yards. His longest was 31. Naquan Wright, their running back, 15 carries, 62 yards. So I mean, they were almost identical in their passing game. They were 20 yards difference, and then they were about 30 yards difference when it comes to their rushing. And this is Alabama. I mean, this is the Alabama of multiple national championships. They won as recently as 2020. You look at all the great players that have come from Alabama. So I kind of wonder, because I've pointed this out on other shows, and I pointed this out on the college football show I do called Big Talk. This is an Alabama we have seen extremely undisciplined Nick Saban teams that almost never happen. Alabama maybe didn't win dominantly all the time, but they were very well coached. They were very well disciplined. They weren't making the dumb mistakes to get themselves, cost themselves a game and put themselves out. This is a team that now I look at them and I'm like, you could make an argument last year because you had Bryce Young at quarterback and he made up for a lot of those mistakes in college football. You could make that argument that, okay, he can make it. He can cover up for a lot of this. They were the number, I believe, 5 team in the nation at one point, just outside of the playoffs. And, Nick Saban was upset. Well, hey, we're favored against, 3 out of those 4 teams. Why aren't we in the playoffs, even though we have 2 losses to Tennessee and LSU, both with combined, 4 points, because they lost to LSU by a 2-point conversion and they lost to Tennessee by a field goal. By a field goal, so 5 points, my bad. That was last year. This is this year. You don't have the same quarterback play. I know in the spring game when I was watching, and even last year when I watched Jalen Milroe was not the guy. He did not seem like he knew what he was doing as far as being a quarterback goes. He was too big. Seemed like he was overthrowing a lot. I figured, okay, they bring in the new offensive coordinator, kind of get the spring game in, a little bit of their camp to see, okay, who's going to really be the guy. And it seems like, honestly, it's gone down to the point of, and Joel Klatt kind of pointed this out with Ohio State, it's not okay, we're going to have 3 really good quarterbacks. It's going to come down to who makes, the smallest mistakes to get beat out. Now it's who makes the least amount of mistakes that we think we can limp into a game with and hope that we can get carried by hopefully a strong running game, which Alabama doesn't have, and a potentially good defense, which Bama does still have a fairly decent defense, but offensive line-wise, it is absolutely atrocious what Alabama has put out there. They can't run the ball. Milroe has been running around. They didn't really do all that great against Texas as far as moving the ball goes, even though I know that they scored, 24 yards. It's absolutely crazy how much Alabama has fallen off. And this is coming from an Alabama hater. I mean, I'm excited to see it, but it's crazy at the complete total 180 flip and the quality of quarterbacks that they don't have anymore. Got a couple comments. Zach, how you doing, man? Appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully you like it. If you have any questions, anything you want to throw out there, please let me know. I'd love to engage with everybody that I can. So I'll move on from Alabama. We'll kind of jump into, week 4 of the college football matchups. There's actually some pretty decent matchups this coming week. We don't really have any big-time matchups that's going to be coming. There's a few. For the Big Ten side, we have Purdue hosting Wisconsin. Can Wisconsin kind of bounce back after taking a loss from Washington State? Actually got Washington State into the rankings. Purdue has looked awfully rough this year so far, which we kind of expect them to regress because of losing the head coach. They lost Aiden O'Connell into the NFL. You have Florida State going to Clemson, which will be a big game. We'll see if Clemson can potentially bounce back. I think Clemson's in the same boat as Alabama this year, unfortunately. I don't think Cade Klubnik is really the guy. I think Dabo Swinney, honestly, is coming to the end of his tenure. He did really great when he had Deshaun Watson. He won a championship. He had Taj Boyd for a little bit, who was actually a lot better than what people would probably give him credit for. He's ran through the ACC for the last 10 years. Then he got Trevor Lawrence. And honestly, a lot of people may or may not, criticize me for this. you kind of started to see the downfall, even with Trevor Lawrence and even with all the talent that that Clemson team had. And I say that because Clemson went, you know, won the national title uh, Trevor Lawrence's freshman year. So they figured, okay, this is going to be a continuing thing. Then he goes back to the national championship against Joe Burrow and LSU, loses. Then they get knocked out by Ohio State the following year, and then Trevor Lawrence leaves. And then after that, DJ Uyunglele unfortunately got a lot of heat, having filled in for Trevor Lawrence for a couple of those games. Actually got the win. Struggled a lot though. He actually ended up leaving because he felt like he was the fall guy for Dabo Swinney and Clemson. Now goes to Oregon State, is absolutely doing fantastic. And now Cade Klubnik is not looking like the guy for Clemson. They lost to Duke, got put right at 25, ended up winning their game, but it's still bad enough that they are now unranked, which has almost been unheard of in the last 10 years, that Clemson no longer ranked. The tickets are actually pretty cheap for Florida State at Clemson. They're as low as $82 down in South Carolina. So that's really surprising, although Florida State struggled against Boston College, so maybe Clemson kind of comes back with the shock and maybe comes back into potential play, but I only see them going into the 20s if they're able to come away with the win. We do have a Big 12 matchup of Oklahoma versus Cincinnati. That's actually going to be the big game on Fox on the big new kickoff show, with number 16 Oklahoma going to Cincinnati. It's not going to, unfortunately, be as interesting as it probably would have been a couple of years ago, where you have Spencer Rattler, you potentially have Jalen Hurts versus a Desmond Ridder type of play. Cincinnati has not looked great this year. Kind of a really rough time for them to debut into the Big 12. I expect Oklahoma to kind of roll over this game with really relatively no issues. Probably two of the biggest matchup. Well, there's actually more big matchups than what I thought there was. We do have number 19 Colorado going to Oregon, which I talked about. I expect Oregon to win that. They struggled against Texas Tech. Texas Tech was supposed to be better this year. A lot of people had them higher up than what they did initially. But with Colorado, I think a lot of the undersize of their defense and their offense. Oregon is a pretty good offensive juggernaut. Bo Nix has looked fantastic as a potential dark horse for the Heisman, which I kind of agree. I watched him at Auburn. Auburn, he was shaky. But last year when he came to when he came to Oregon, aside from the Georgia game, Oregon actually looked really good last year, aside from losing to Utah and then also losing to Oregon State. Oregon actually looked pretty decent last year, so I could see him potentially making an upset. There's also number 15 Ole Miss at number 13 Alabama. I'm going to give it to Bama, but I'm going to give it in a close game, and I say that because of Alabama's quarterback situation, but their home crowd has a lot to do with their help. They typically play better at home. They're going to, and I don't see Nick Saban not coming and kind of getting into the butts of his guys, saying, look, we only beat a Group 5 school by 2 touchdowns. This is absolutely unacceptable. So I definitely see him kind of getting in that and trying to right that wrong pretty quickly. One of the matchups that I think is interesting, most other people in college football probably won't unless you're fans of the school or unless you're fans of Pac-12. Number 14, Oregon State goes to number 21, Washington State. This is actually going to be one I want to watch. I say that because they're the only 2 true Pac-2 schools left that actually have total control over the Pac-12 as it stands currently, because everybody else is leaving. They're both ranked, and these are the 2 schools that no conference wants, unfortunately. And I'm really excited to see who kind of comes out on top. I think Oregon State will, but I think it'll be a very close battle. And it's one of those for the storyline. I think it's kind of cool of, okay, who is really the better of the 2. Maybe it decides whether or not they go into a conference. Maybe it doesn't, but I still think it'll be kind of interesting. It's kind of hard to explain like a true reason as to why, but I just do. Then probably the absolute biggest matchup this coming weekend, number 6 Ohio State goes to number 9 Notre Dame. And that's the biggest matchup because the tickets for there also cost the most. They start as low as $444 to go to that game up in South Bend here in Indiana. I'm going to give Notre Dame this win, and a lot of people may or may not be surprised by that. I say that for a couple reasons. I say that because Sam Hartman has looked absolutely fantastic as he transferred from Wake Forest. He had 110 career touchdowns, at least passing touchdowns from Wake Forest, coming into being the starter for Notre Dame. Ray Bond, let's go Buffaloes. Come on, Ray. I know you're over in the DMV, so you're not rooting for the Terps. You're not rooting for the Hokies, for Virginia Tech, the Cavaliers for Virginia, the Buffaloes. I mean, I respect it. I'm not mad at you. I'm just a little confused, man. I'm a little confused. We got to talk about that one day. We got to talk about how you feel about the Buffaloes. I'm not upset. I just got to ask. But Ohio State, the biggest question, offensively, they're not moving the ball like they did with C.J. Stroud. Kyle McCord is getting a little bit more comfortable in the offense. We have two of the best wide receivers in college football right now in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emmanuel Abuka. And Ohio State has looked just so stagnant. They haven't truly dominated any teams that you would expect them to dominate. They struggled against IU wholeheartedly. Now, of course, they beat Youngstown. They beat another super small school, which we all expected that to happen. But this will really be their first true test. Is Ohio State still potentially competing for a national title? Or is Ohio State in the boat of they still need to go out and recruit a potential five-star quarterback, and they really need to do some digging? And could this potentially be Ryan Day's last year with the Buckeyes? He's lost the last two against Michigan. He was able to get into the playoff last year in a super close game against Georgia. There's a lot of controversy and skepticism behind that as to if Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to still stay in the game. Would we potentially have an Ohio State versus TCU matchup, which I think would have been fantastic. It would have been a lot better than the beatdown that we saw, unfortunately. Or, of course, if you guys are Big Ten fans, the all-important V game, part two. Michigan versus Ohio State for the national title. How massive would that have been? Could Ohio State potentially right the ship then? Get the ultimate win over their rival by beating them for a national title. But to me, that's probably the biggest matchup, and obviously by the price it shows it. Another really big matchup, number 24 Iowa goes to number 7 Penn State, which will be pretty good. That's supposed to be the whiteout game as well for Penn State, where everybody wears white. Penn State, they struggled a little bit against West Virginia, but then were able to right the ship pretty quickly. So I do see Penn State being able to come out with a victory on this one. So a lot of interesting college football games this weekend that I'm excited to watch. I'm excited to be home to be able to watch them and be able to have YouTube TV and be able to watch them. Because unfortunately, I didn't have it week one, and then the last 2 Saturdays I've been away and haven't been able to watch it on my phone as much, at least multiple games at once. So now let's move into the NFL because we have our first game starting on Thursday, which is tomorrow. And I'm not even going to think I'm going to do picks anymore. I went 9-7 week one. I think I went probably 9-7 or 8-8 this past weekend. It's not been good. My picks have been absolute trash so far. So I think I'm going to probably skip the pick department. But let's kind of touch on to some of the big things that's happened out of my other favorite team that I have. Is if anybody knows that has watched the show pretty consistently, I am a pretty diehard college football fan. I'm also a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan, as well as I grew up watching a lot of Chicago Bears. So I have a very, very soft spot in my heart for the Bears. And the Bears, unfortunately, have had a rough first few weeks here in the NFL season. They're 0-2. They got blown out by the Packers. They didn't look good against the Buccaneers. They ended up losing that one as well. And there's a lot of questions to, is Justin Fields still the guy for Chicago, as well as their defensive coordinator, Alan Williams, just resigned. There's a lot of kind of weird controversy that happened with that. From what I've seen, some of that may be a hoax, some of it may not be. There was a potential report that the Bears headquarters was raided by the FBI for potential child pornography allegations against him. But I've since heard and seen that that's potentially false. Nobody said there's any type of law enforcement there. That he's apparently going through some personal issues and he's actually resigning his position. And Matt Eberflus is going to take over calling the defensive plays for the Bears, which to me is an upgrade. I mean, Matt was a great defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. He was more of the linebackers coach there, went to Indianapolis, did great with that defense for a long time in Indy, and is actually what ended up landing him the Chicago Bears job. So hopefully he's able to at least turn the Bears defense around. Now, offensively for Justin, it's a mess for the Bears, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of optimism, there's a lot of hope for me. And I come in, I liked the Bears, especially once they got the DJ Moore trade. I figured, okay, they've got Justin Fields a legitimate number one now. He's got Darnell Mooney, he's got Cole Kmet, he'll have DJ Moore. He has Khalil Herbert in the backfield. They got Dante Foreman in the backfield as well for him as far as running back goes. They drafted the kid out of Tennessee, right at the tackle position. So they're trying to boost the offensive line. I figured, okay, this is now the chance for the Bears to really, have a legitimate shot. This is a chance for Justin Fields to continue to hopefully show not only highlights, but that he can progress into being a franchise quarterback. And unfortunately, that has just not been the case so far for the Bears or for Justin Fields. Now, I will say this because I tend to defend Justin Fields quite a bit because I watched him at Ohio State. I thought he was fantastic. I thought he was the second best quarterback in the draft that year. And for whatever reason, the Jets decided that they thought Zach Wilson was the second best quarterback, which to me is absolutely insane. But I've already talked about that. I'm not gonna dive too deep into that. But looking at his statistics so far this season, it's been ugly for Justin. And I blame a lot of that on Luke Getsy being the offensive coordinator. We saw in the first game, he did not do well with Justin Fields against the Packers. It was a lot of screens. It was a lot of really weird runs. He did not do very well at all for Chicago. And you figured, okay, they're going to turn it around against the Buccaneers. A little bit more of a reasonable matchup. Baker Mayfield gets kind of a surprise win over the Vikings week 1. The Buccaneers are kind of trying to figure out who they are. They have offensive line issues. Defense is getting older. But they still have Mike Evans. They still have Chris Godwin. Roshan, I think Johnson is the name. For the running back is actually pretty decent. They still have Devin Bush. Bush, Devin White. So many. I'm for 99% sure it's Devin White. On the defensive side of the ball. And the offense was still so lackluster. I mean, Fields went 16 of 29, 211 yards, completed 55%, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, and was sacked 6 times. He's already been sacked 10 just to start the season. He's got 427 yards, about 61% completion, quarterback rating 22, 2 touchdowns, and 3 picks, unfortunately. And it's so sad because this is a guy that, again, they put weapons around him. They're trying to get him, better and better. And it just seems as if they're completely dropping the ball with him. Unfortunately, it seems as if, Justin Fields is going to end up as a quarterback bust. And to me, I don't really consider that fair for a couple reasons. Again, love the Bears. I want to put that out there. Absolutely love the Bears. But he got drafted to an organization that historically doesn't really do offense. They do defense. That is what they've been known for ever since the 1985 Bears. And the 1985 Bears was able to carry them to a national title, a Super Bowl title. And it just seems to be what they go with. They had an offensive guy in Matt Nagy who was able to make Mitchell Trubisky, fairly successful. And it seems, and this is also one of those I've noticed with the NFL in general, is if you have an offensive coach, probably going to go for a defensive coach next. If you have a defensive coach, probably going to go for an offensive coach next. So, unfortunately, I think by the time Matt Eberflus probably gets fired, as well as Justin Fields gets cut or released around the same time, is when they're going to bring an offensive coach, and then they're probably going to get a quarterback, and that we'll see if that potentially works out or not. But it just sucks. And I will say too, it's weird how the Bears decided to go about their draft as well, because we know they needed help on the offensive line. They only drafted one offensive lineman, and that's Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. They spent 3 picks on defensive tackles throughout this whole entire draft. They got Gervon Dexter out of Florida, defensive tackle, Zach Pickens out of South Carolina, defensive tackle, Terrell Smith, cornerback out of Minnesota, Travis Bell, defensive tackle out of Kennesaw State, Kendall Williamson, cornerback out of Stanford, Tyreek Stevenson, cornerback, Miami. The only 2 offensive weapons that they got for Fields to potentially work with, they got Roschon Johnson out of Texas, and they got Tyler Scott, wide receiver, out of Cincinnati. That's it. That's all they got Fields to work with on the offensive side of the ball. And yes, Jay, I am saying that unfortunately the Bears can't draft. And we've seen that a lot. They didn't really do great as far as drafting wide receivers. At one point, they were able to draft Alshon Jeffrey. He was fantastic. They were able to sign Brandon Marshall, to the Bears. But yeah, they really can't draft. Now defensively, they can draft. They can draft great defenses. They had Lance Briggs. They had Brian Urlacher, Peanut Tillman, Major Wright. Those are just guys recently, as far as the 2006 Super Bowl all the way up to about 2013, 2014, when that finally ended. But yeah, unfortunately, the Bears just they can't draft, and it sucks for a guy like Fields that has the potential. You saw him go 20-2 at Ohio State to now he's 5-22 as a starter. Exactly. Jay pointed out, after drafting Fields, you have to start drafting to fill the offense. Otherwise, you're doing him a disservice, and they really are. They are doing him a disservice. He's an extremely talented quarterback, and I know everybody tends to hate on Ohio State quarterbacks because they don't do well. I tend to hate on Bama quarterbacks because the exact same thing. I've said this a lot for anybody that hasn't ever watched the show. It all depends on where you get drafted to as to if you're able to truly succeed from college. There's only a handful of guys in the history of the sport ever that can go from, a pretty good college football program and carry a bad NFL organization to any type of prominence. And Mike, I know you watch the show, and I appreciate it, buddy. So we're talking about how everybody's going to label Fields as a bust. Unfortunately, now really the Bears haven't done any type of service to him as far as drafting offense. I pointed out they only drafted 2 offensive players this last draft. The rest of them were all defense, 3 of them on defensive tackles. But you look at these guys, and you look at Justin Fields from Ohio State. He was around, 5-star, first-round talent, absolutely everywhere on all sides of the ball. You look at Mac Jones currently with Patriots. When he was at Alabama, you look at his wide receiver room was absolutely insane. He had Henry Ruggs, he had Jerry Jeudy. You have Devontae Smith. I'm missing one more Alabama wide receiver that I can't think of off the top of my head. But you have all of these first-round talent wide receivers. You have first-round talent on the offensive line. You have a star-studded defense on the opposite side of the ball that's able to help you as a whole entire team. Then you get drafted to, the Bears. You get drafted to, the Browns, the Raiders, the Lions. And these are just historically franchises that, guys tend to get drafted to, and it just doesn't work out because it's hard to carry. Justin Fields even said it supposedly one time about some of the wide receivers that the Bears have. These guys would never make it on Ohio State's field to play for Ohio State. And he's 100% right. They would never make it to Ohio State to even remotely start. So, when the Bears had a decent offensive, no quarterback, I'm telling you, Jay, like 2012, 2013, when they had, Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey, they had Martellus Bennett, they had Matt Forte, and they had Jay Cutler. It was like, man, that was a super scary offense. Then you had Brian Urlacher, you had Lance Briggs, you had Peanut Tillman on the Tim Jennings on the other side of the ball, and then Jay Cutler gets hurt, and it goes absolutely down the toilet. It was so upsetting because that defense
it was a scary, scoring defense that was able to do absolute wonders for them. It kept them in a lot of the games. And yeah, and the crazy part, Jay Cutler is actually the best quarterback the Bears franchise has had for an extremely long time. Josh McCown is the greatest Bear of all time. I don't know, man. At least Jim McMahon was able to get you guys a Super Bowl. He was there. And Sexy Rexy didn't get you guys to the Super Bowl. Kyle Orton did. But Sexy Rexy was the one that started the Super Bowl. And, of course, he had to go against one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time in Peyton Manning. And we unfortunately know how that goes. But it's just sad to see this happen with the Bears. Like I said, Allen Johnson getting fired. Well, not fired, stepping down. Or Alan Williams, my apologies. Alan Williams. I know, Mike, I am a Bears fan. I will 100% admit that. I'm a Cowboys fan and a Bears fan. I still love the Bears. I'm 100% still all for them, even amidst everything that's happening. Ride or die, we still rooting for the Bears. But it's going to be a rough season, buddy. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's going to be an absolutely rough season. But I do want to point out a couple kind of good games that I'm at least excited to see this coming weekend. Chargers at the Vikings, and I say that because it's two 0-2 winless teams facing off that are supposed to have higher expectations than pretty much anybody expected. And I read a crazy stat is. Mike, you've already known that. This is not really surprising. I love the Cowboys, and you love pizza, and I love those kids. Come on, man. The Chargers have scored, over 30 points each game. They haven't turned the ball over. They've been absolutely fantastic in, every piece of the ball that they can, except for getting the win. And they're the only team in NFL history to basically score extremely high, move the ball extremely well, not have a turnover, and lose both games that they start. Now, I will say, as a Cowboys fan, two Chargers fans, that's what we had to deal with Kellen Moore. I think Kellen Moore is a good offensive coordinator, but I think there's a lot that he needs to learn. He needs to learn balance. He needs to learn how to run the ball. The fact that you have Justin Herbert, you have Keenan Allen, you have Williams, you also have the kid out of TCU that is also a first-round wide receiver. You have Gerald Everett, even though he's not the greatest tight end, he's an above-average tight end. You have Austin Eckler. You have a defense led by Joey Bosa, by Khalil Mack, by Derwin James. And you're 0-2 is absolutely insane to me. Now, a lot of this is potentially on Brandon Staley and the fact that he's very aggressive in how he likes to coach. He likes to go for it on a lot of fourth downs. But to me, a lot of it comes down to the offense with Kellen Moore. Is he loves to force the ball. He loves to have high-scoring games. He loves to show that he's a great offensive mind. But you need to be able to have a balance with having your running backs be able to take a lot of the time off the clock, load management, and don't give the team another chance to score. That's honestly what would hurt Dallas a lot of times. He would have Dak throw in these weird situations, force the ball, and it would potentially cost them the game. And I say that as a Cowboys fan that, talent-wise, you look at what Dallas had at one point. They had Amari Cooper, you had CeeDee Lamb, you had Michael Gallup, all at the absolute top of their game. You had Dalton Schultz, you had Ezekiel Elliott, you had Dak, you had a very good offensive line, a defense that has been getting better, and they did absolutely nothing with it. They also had Randall Cobb as their fourth wide receiver when he had not really a bad year, but not necessarily a great year either. And Dallas just didn't do anything with it, and I blame a lot of that on Kellen Moore and Mike McCarthy both. Just because they try to be aggressive, they try to be kind of cute with what they do, and it ended up biting them in the butt in the long run. So I feel bad for the Chargers. I am interested to see how this game goes. Is Kirk Cousins going to be the one to right the ship, or is it going to be Justin Herbert? Who's going to be the one to come away with the win? One that might be a little bit underrated is the Bills going to Washington to face the Commanders, who are surprisingly 2-0. Josh Allen has had a rough start to start the season. 4 touchdowns, 3 picks. He's thrown 510 yards so far in the first 2 games. And the Bills as a whole, they struggled wholeheartedly against a Jets team that had just lost Aaron Rodgers. Now they ended up riding the ship against the Raiders, but everybody kind of expected that because Jimmy G's not bad, but I don't believe Josh McDaniels is the guy. I don't believe that Jimmy G is going to be the one to carry the Raiders to the absolute promised land. Of course, you have the Steelers, going to Las Vegas to face the Raiders on Sunday night. That's another team that I actually listened to this morning. Is Mike Tomlin going to just stay loyal to Matt Canada and potentially have him hold Kenny Pickett back? Offensively, they're still pretty decent, but they're 31st in running the ball. They have not hardly let Najee Harris touch the ball at all, and I don't know why. He's one of the few pretty good products that they've had from Alabama. He had a good year last year, good year his rookie year, and they haven't run the ball, and I don't understand why. He's great running back, and they have a decent offensive line. I mean, Kenny Pickett has to roll out and do a lot, but it's not bad. And the fact that Mike Tomlin is kind of doing a Chicago Bears thing of, just focusing on the defense being able to carry the team, which, Mike Tomlin, I would say, has been pretty successful in being able to do that when you have TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick. But offensively, they're going to have to do the same thing. You're going to have to be able to move the ball. And they pointed it out on 2 Pros and a Cup of Joe this morning that, their schedule is going to get tough for the Steelers. They face the Raiders, they face the Texans, and those are both road games. Then they come back home and they have to face the Ravens. So can he potentially get the offense clicking against 2 really bad teams against games that you should win before you have a true test in having to face the Baltimore Ravens? And if not, I think I can honestly see Matt Canada getting either demoted or getting the boot shortly afterwards. So that'll be a game that I want to see. Probably another one is a rematch of not this Super Bowl, but the Super Bowl before that with the Rams versus the Bengals. Joe Burrow has not looked good. The Rams have actually looked pretty decent, a lot better than what we expected. The other question is Joe Burrow even going to play? With the injury and the fact that Joe Burrow has played so poorly, can he potentially be the guy to lead them back? Now that I saw a stat that he is like 1-7 in weeks 1 through 2, but then he's I think he's like 23-12-1 in all the games after that. So he does pretty decent after the first couple of weeks for whatever reason. But it's looking like it's going to be a rough year for Cincinnati, especially considering they gave him all that money. T. Higgins isn't signed, which is crazy. I kind of expect them to maybe trade him by the trade deadline because otherwise, they're not going to be able to get anything for him. He's going to be a free agent. He's just going to be able to walk. So we'll see if they potentially re-sign him or if they trade him. There are a few other kind of decent games that may or may not get into, but like I said, with my picks, I've been wrong on just about all of my picks so far. I do want to point out one more thing, though, before I hop off. The Cleveland Browns. And I talked about this with Rachel Hill on Her in the Huddle. Obviously, they lost Nick Chubb to a super gruesome injury this past Monday night against the Steelers. And they ended up actually re-signing Kareem Hunt, which I said at the time makes a lot of sense. He's been with the system for the last few years. He's really solid. They honestly couldn't really use him super well with Chubb because you have a star running back like Chubb, you have a star running back like Hunt. They kind of alternated, but it was primarily the Nick Chubb show, which it should have been. But now they were able to get Kareem Hunt back in. He should be pretty solid for him for the rest of the season. Now, the one thing I will say is, and Rachel kind of disagreed as a Browns fan, which I get. She's defending her quarterback, and a few of the people up in Cleveland brought up a lot of good points.
I think it's kind of coming to the end for Deshaun Watson. And I say that because, you know, he hasn't looked like the 2019 or even 2020 version of Deshaun Watson when he was with the Texans. 2019, they were winning. He looked fantastic. Took it to the playoffs. The very next year, they went 4-12. Still had a fantastic statistical year, but he looked, but they lost, 12 games. Then, of course, all the allegations come out. He actually sat for all of the 2021 season. Then he got traded to the Browns and then served an 11-game suspension. Then came back for the last 6 games for Cleveland. So I kind of gave him a pass a little bit last year because of, okay, he's rusty. He hasn't played in almost 2 years. He's got to kind of get back into the groove of things. And I figured, okay, last year's kind of a wash. He hasn't really learned the system. He hasn't been able to play much. He can't build chemistry with guys. This year will be different because he has a full off season now with the team. He has a full off season now with all the guys. His training camp. He played like one series in the preseason, which again I get. Keep your starters healthy. Try to not expose them to potential injuries and whatnot. But he's looked bad both games against Bengals and against the Steelers. He has not looked like the Deshaun Watson of old. Against Cincy, he was 16-29, 154 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. He was sacked 3 times. And then against Pittsburgh, he was 22 of 40, 235. Both games, he only completed 55% of his passes, a touchdown, a pick, and he was sacked 6 times. The pick, obviously, pick 6, and then he also had a strip fumble return for a touchdown. So this to me, I know the Browns tied up a ton of money in him. They dried up, $230 million. They still owe him like $140 million no matter what. Dylan, man, appreciate you tuning in. Let's go. Appreciate all the love and support, all the sharing that you do. Appreciate it, man. But and again, I know it's only 2 games in the season. It's a bit of an overreaction. We'll have to see how kind of the rest of the year goes. But I do want to ask Cleveland fans, because again, this is kind of early. At what point do you think you should pull the plug on the Deshaun Watson experiment? Because, he's had 8 games. He's had basically about half a season on top of the offseason to get back into the groove of things, and he's not showing the Deshaun Watson that he was showing at Clemson, that he was showing in Houston. And it's saddening because of how great he was at Clemson, what he was able to do for Houston. Statistically, his career-wise, he's still a great quarterback. He's thrown 16,000 yards. He's got about 67% completion, 113 touchdowns to 43 picks. And so far this season, he's projected to throw about 55% completions, throw about 3,300 yards, 17 touchdowns, 17 picks. That's the projection as per ESPN. I think they go a lot off of what he kind of had the last game, which by the looks of it, yeah, they basically just copy and pasted. That's annoying. But yeah, I think it's time to kind of pull the plug on Deshaun Watson. I think Kevin Stefanski will end up getting fired out of Cleveland after this season because I don't see them being able to make the playoffs, not especially with all the talent that's in the AFC. You got to think about it. The Miami Dolphins are more likely to go in the playoffs. The Bills probably will. The Ravens probably right now, looking at it, just out of 2 weeks, are the favorites coming out of the AFC North. Jacksonville's probably going to be in there. The Chiefs are going to be in there. So that's 5. We only got 2 spots left. Potentially going to the Chargers or the Broncos. Maybe another AFC North team, the Bengals or Steelers. Or maybe you have a third AFC East team. Maybe the Jets are able to kind of route the ship with Zach Wilson, or they trade for another quarterback, or the Patriots are able to kind of keep just enough afloat. But I don't see Cleveland being able to kind of stay with that and be able to, be able to be that competitive with a guy that. And I know a lot of teams or a lot of fans are going to say, well, they don't have a great offensive line, which you're right, they don't.
Weapons-wise, they're okay. They've got Amari Cooper. They've got Donovan Peoples-Jones coming into, I think, his third season now, if I remember correctly. They've got Njoku. Now they're going to have Kareem Hunt instead of Nick Chubb. So they have weapons. Like, they have the potential. Like I said, it's crazy that Deshaun has not looked good, throughout camp, throughout this past offseason. There's a lot of rumors that he didn't look good in camp. So we'll have to see what Cleveland's able to do, where Cleveland goes from here. But appreciate everybody tuning in. Appreciate everybody commenting. Absolutely love it. Appreciate it. Please like, share, subscribe. Listen to me wherever you'd like to find your podcasts at. You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Inside the Hoosier Mind, and on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Hoosier Mind. If you'd like to see me, like to see any other great content from a lot of great sports content creators, Mike is great if you love anything Chicago related, also anything WNBA related. Mike is absolutely your guy. Shout out to Mike. Jay Ness is not only the owner of ASAP, but does everything MMA, boxing, any type of hand-to-hand combat sports. Jay is your guy. Absolutely great content. Appreciate the love and support, everybody. I will see y'all next week. Hopefully y'all have a great weekend, and let's enjoy some football and just keep on rolling, man. Let's keep rolling. Deuces. Everybody have a great night, and I will see y'all next week.